Dr. Prabhakar Raghavan to give his keynote address.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the warm welcome and the very inspiring inaugural by Dr. Kohli. I've been at Yahoo for a little over 2 years, and what I'd like to talk to you today about is the kind of scientific underpinnings it takes to drive an industry and a business like ours. So let me take a moment to tell you what companies like mine do. We have essentially two marketplaces we deal with. On the one side, we have a sequence of audience arriving, and I'll tell you in a moment what they're trying to get done. Okay. On the other side, we have people providing content. These are people that include news providers. They could be personal websites like mine and yours. And there are also content providers that we call advertisers. Okay. So some of these content providers cost us money to feed in their content, okay, like news services, or even if we have to crawl somebody's website, that costs us money. And then there's the other kind of content providers who are willing to pay us money. Okay. And what we're trying to do over and over again, in the case of Yahoo about 5 billion times a day, is to juxtapose a combination of content that both satisfies the audience and is profitable. Okay, so we essentially provide a real-time matching service between, on the left side, a marketplace of intents from audiences and a marketplace of information from the right side. Okay? Now, one of the features of these marketplaces, something that I'll touch upon briefly, but something we've come to learn over the last few years, is these marketplaces are self-tuning. We learn from the behavior of people, and we learn from the behavior of information providers. Okay. I list here some of the principles in these. They include, besides the company I work for, AOL, Google. The Interactive Corporation is Barry Diller's holding company that owns a number of these properties, MSN, of course. And if you don't recognize that other logo, it's News Corporation that owns MySpace. All right. So the promise of these kinds of systems is, first of all, the scale. You're not any longer looking at 1 million people at a time or 10 million people at a time, which is kind of the scale of some of the largest newspapers' reach. We're looking at billions of people. The second aspect to this is targetability. Okay. So you're able to look at what people want at a finer grain, at a finer granularity than you could in the traditional broadcast and print media. Okay. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, there's a notion of measurability. It's, in the old days, people would say, especially marketing executives would say, I know that half my marketing budget is wasted. I just don't know which half. Right? That obstacle tends to go away because you can meter people's actions. Okay. Right. So what I like to think about is what scientific underpinnings does one need to put in place to strategically address these issues. Okay. And if there is one takeaway I want you to take from this talk, it's that, in my view, computing and technology have come to meet the social sciences and microeconomics like never before. And that's the conclusion I'll take you to. I'll take you through a number of settings en route. And I'll begin with a very familiar experience, that's search. Okay? So search is something that you're used to getting from providers like Google and Yahoo. In the interest of not being parochial to either of these companies, I'll go to a neutral third party, that's Microsoft. So if you think about this search, this is a typical search page. This is an MSN Live search. Somebody typed in Latin canon. And there's a clear separation here of the editorial and the advertisement. On the left, you have the editorial content. These are pages that Microsoft felt were relevant to this query. On the right is the monetization. So the left is the audience gathering mechanism. The right is the monetization. And we'll touch upon the monetization in some detail towards the end of this talk. Okay? All right. Where do we want to take search next? So the premise that I'm going to put before you is that nobody wants to search. Okay? And this seems a little odd to say in this hyperconnected world of Googling that everybody does. But in fact, I'll argue to you that people don't want to search. They want to get tasks done. Okay? Nobody goes home every day at the end saying, let me run some searches. Nobody comes to work saying, let me run some searches. People are trying to get tasks done. And today, the way information and services are structured, we punctuate the task fulfillment with a sequence of searches so that in the course of getting your task done, you over and over again force people to search, gather information, aggregate the information in their heads, and use it to make decisions. Okay? And so here's a simple example. I want to book a vacation. What I end up doing is from start to finish, I might issue a Google search, I might issue a fare query, I might look for a place to stay, I might look for a rental car, and so on. And then I piece together all this information to create a composite. Okay? What does it take to get beyond this? Okay? Let me give you some baby steps that we and other providers are already taking in this. Okay? So here's a simple example. Papa John's is the name of a pizza chain in the United States. Okay? So if you go to Yahoo today and type the query Papa John's, and you'll get a very similar experience at Google as well. Okay? You do get, of course, the homepage of Papa John's on top, which is what you would expect. But I want to point out to you, you get a couple of extra things. Whoops. How do I go up? If you look near the top heading, it says NASDAQ PZZA, or pizza, which is the stock ticker symbol for Papa John's. So in this case, the search engine recognized that you could have an intent as an investor in looking at the stock performance of this company. So you go directly to the stock intent. Or it could just be that you're hungry. So there's another link below that says Papa John's near you, as in if you're hungry and just want to order a pizza, you can click there. And when you do that, what we'll give you is a little map showing where you are, or where Yahoo thinks you are, together with the nearest 6 or 7 Papa John's pizza outlets. Okay? So there's an aspect here where the engine, beyond providing matching documents, has attempted to divine your intent and try to partially fulfill that intent. Okay? And then you can create all the click-to-call and other services that you can think of. Now, this is an extremely simple example, and one can go much further. So you have to ask, what does it take to go beyond this? Okay? So let me take you through scenarios and what it will demand of us to get there. Okay? When we look at documents, what we need to do, today we take documents and index them into a search engine that we then retrieve in response to a query. Going forward, what we need to do is to extract objects from documents. What do I mean by extracting objects? I want to extract that this page is actually about a particular kind of business, which is in the restaurant and fast food area, and it happens to sell pizza. Okay? So that's an aspect of typing that goes far beyond what we're able to do today. Okay? Let me give you another example. You want to be in a situation where a user comes in and says, I want a hotel near Leicester Square in London. Okay? And it comes back and says, here's one. It's called the Savoy. And it's located wherever it's located. That verbiage is from the homepage of the Savoy Hotel. But at the same time, I should be able to piece together in that same experience for the end user some reviews. Okay? So this is what we call long-tail content. These are the opinions of independent social annotations, people who have experienced the Savoy and are willing to share their views. Okay? Now, the challenge here is obviously the homepage of the Savoy Hotel doesn't include all these reviews from people around the world. Okay? We need to be able to find these reviews from wherever they are, normalize them as referring to this particular hotel or this particular restaurant or airline, and piece them together do is extract intent. Okay. So first of all, you want a hotel, you need to have some notion of what Leicester Square is. It's someplace in London. You might go further and say, well, people who like to stay in Leicester Square are interested in theater, and so they might be interested in theater tickets as well. Okay. So you want to juxtapose objects. You want to find matching objects, whether it's reviews, whether it's deals, whether it's theater tickets, whatever it is, and put them together in a composite experience. Okay. So no longer do you want 10 matching documents as we provide today. You want to go to a world beyond where you're divining and satisfying intent. Okay? Likewise, simple example, which you can actually get today on your mobile phone. If you come and type a movie name, you don't want 10 documents that contain the movie name. What you want is perhaps a trailer, the leading actors and actresses, reviews, showtimes, buy a ticket. Okay? And for very special classes of queries, we're pretty much there already. But to do this at scale takes a lot of science that we don't have yet today. Okay? So here's some of the grand challenges I want to lay out to you as we think about and contemplate this future. Okay? What's an intent? Okay? You see, I'm making a shift here from search retrieving content to search retrieving intent. Okay? What's this web of objects? When I talk of a web of objects, it's no longer just a bunch of pages that hyperlink to each other. I need to understand that this review that Bob has written here pertains to this restaurant here, or this person had a bad experience with this airline. Okay? And you do that largely through semantic extraction, not because people have explicitly hyperlinked. Okay? You want to tap the power of social annotations. The fact that 1 million people, or potentially 1 billion people around the world, are willing to express themselves freely is it's a precious resource that we need to be able to tap. Okay. How do you gauge intent satisfaction? When I present a composite experience, how do you figure out that, in fact, the intent was satisfied? You see, today, classical mechanisms from information retrieval talk about whether a document is relevant to a query or not. Now we need to be able to talk about whether an experience, a composite experience like the ones we're talking about here, will satisfy an end user or not. Okay. That turns into building a framework for relevance, okay, because relevance is no longer a matter of is the document relevant, but is the experience as a whole relevant. Okay? All right. Now that leads me to my next segment on community content, which goes by various names, including social media and so on. If you come from the information sciences side of the house, you think of this as information retrieval meets social journalism or citizen journalism. If you're a computer scientist like myself, you think about new mechanisms for bypassing the Turing test, which is a classic conundrum in artificial intelligence. So I'll explicate on this in a moment. Okay. Let's think for a moment about the rate at which content is created today. Okay. If you look at published content, there's a few gigabytes created each day. Professional web content, so this is stuff put up by universities, companies, and governments, is growing at around 2 gigabytes a day. Okay. User-generated content, and I'll break this down in a moment, is growing much faster already. Okay. This is blogs, reviews, so on. And this is all a tiny fraction of total private textual content, which is growing at around 2 terabytes a day. This includes all our emails and memos and so on. Okay, PowerPoints, all this stuff. Okay, so let's focus in on this user-generated content for a moment, because I believe it's germane to the theme of this conference. A number of these figures, by the way, are due to my colleague Andrew Tompkins, whom I acknowledge on the slide. Okay. All right, if you think about user-generated metadata, which is data about data, first piece is what I call anchor text. That grows at around 100 megabytes a day. So what's anchor text? How many people here have heard the phrase anchor text? Okay, a few people have heard the phrase anchor text. You see, anchor text is the annotation that's implicit in web pages that hyperlink to other web pages. So, for instance, if you go to a search engine today and type the query Big Blue, which is the popular name for IBM, we will return to you as top hit the homepage of IBM. This despite the fact that nowhere in its marketing literature does IBM refer to itself as Big Blue. Okay? And why are we able to do this? This is because of the power of the community. This is the power of millions of people around the web who point to the IBM homepages and say, this is Big Blue. Okay? So we are able to capitalize on this text around hyperlinks. That's what's called anchor text. Okay? Now that's growing at around 100 megabytes a day. Okay? People are tagging pages with things like delicious. That too is growing around 100 megabytes a day. Okay? Reviews are much smaller because they're more nuanced, carefully written content, around 5 megabytes a day. If you look at just page views, which is people clicking on pages, that's a few hundred gigabytes a day. Now that's much more implicit. Okay? It's not explicit as in people aren't consciously typing anything, they're just clicking stuff, and if you sat and watched that's around 100 gigabytes a day. Okay. If you look at the role of anchor text, it was pretty fundamental in taking search from where it was 10 years ago to today. A great deal is made of algorithms like PageRank and so on, but if I had to think of a huge factor in web search engines today, it's this anchor text. Okay. If you look at this user-generated content, I would argue that it's increasingly rich and available, but not yet quite central to how we purpose search towards this marketplace of intents. Okay? So let's start looking at some forms of user-generated content. How many of you here have heard of Flickr? Okay? So Flickr is a photo sharing service. People upload pictures, people tag pictures, and you can go in there and type a query like Jaguar, and it returns pictures of Jaguars to you. Okay? Now, the reason it can return pictures of Jaguars to you is not because it can look at, say, one of those blurry pictures at the bottom left and do a sophisticated image analysis and say, well, that looks like a Jaguar. No, not at all. The only reason we're able to return these pictures as germane to the query Jaguar is because people have tagged these pictures with the word Jaguar. That's all. Okay, so it's user-generated content to the rescue again. Okay, so it's a community phenomenon where millions of people share and tag each other's photographs. You can ask the question why, and this does beg some sociological analysis. Okay? But what it gives us is that the wisdom of the crowd saying this is a Jaguar, can be used to search. Okay? And as I mentioned before, this principle is not new. It's been used for anchor text in search before. Okay? In a sense, we don't have to pass the Turing test of doing object recognition. We have people telling us what these objects are. Okay? Now, if you take this forward, whether it's Flickr, Delicious, or any of these things, it starts to beg some interesting questions. How do we use these tags better to fulfill intents? Okay? How do you cope with spam? If there's enough commercial motives that come in here, then with it comes spam. Okay? What's the ratings and reputation system by which you can trust certain people's tags but not certain others? Okay. Now, the bigger challenge that comes to mind is where else can you use the power of the people? If you had at your disposal hundreds of millions of people who readily would contribute in these fashions, whether it's tags or reviews or clicks, what can you do? And so that leads to the question, what are the incentive mechanisms that cause people to contribute? I want to draw your attention to a series of fascinating work by Luis Fanon, who was a student and recently became a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University. For his thesis, he created something on the web called the ESP game. Has anyone here played the ESP game? Okay, Nosh has played the ESP game. So I'm going to show you a screenshot of the ESP game. So here's how it works. So Luis had several million images, and he wanted people to contribute descriptive tags of these images so that you could then search. So here's the game he set up on the web. Okay? You log in, and when you log in, you're randomly paired up with somebody else who's logged in. Not somebody you know. You have no idea who they are. You don't know where they are. And so you have no means for communicating with them. Okay? So you're shown the same image, both partners in this game, And now you start typing words that are descriptive of this image. And your objective is to match a descriptive word with your partner. And when you do that, you win, you collect some points, and you're shown a new image. Okay, now think about the beauty of the scheme. Okay. You as a participant are engrossed in typing descriptive words and hoping the other guy has the good sense to type the same descriptive words, right? And Luis will give you some fascinating anecdotes about how people get upset at their partners, people get thrilled with their partners. Sometimes people have written to Luis saying, I really like this partner, I want to marry the person, and so on. But all the while, Luis is harvesting descriptive tags of images that no program in artificial intelligence could necessarily have harvested. Okay? It's brilliant if you think about the scheme. And now he's taking this much further through a sequence of other games. Okay? One of his projects right now is the transcription by OCR of many ancient manuscripts. And what's happening there is OCR fails on many of the ancient fonts, and because of paper being dirty and so on. And he's again putting up this kind of scheme where people are playing games. And when they win, they think they're getting points, they're getting a satisfaction, and he's getting the OCRing done. Okay? All right. I'm going to tell you about a derivative or related piece of work. 4 years ago, Yahoo was far and away the leader in search in Korea. And then we got blown away by a company called Naver, which is a Korean company. Okay. What Naver did was very interesting. They did not crawl web pages, they did not index web pages, they did not search web pages. Okay. What they did instead was to set up a community platform where anyone could come and ask a question and anybody else could answer. And that's it. So there's no engine, there's no search, there's no index. You go ask a question and somebody else comes along and answers. Okay. And in Korea, that took off. Now this is interesting for a number of reasons, because among other things, Korea is viewed as sort of a vanguard of the cyber society. Okay. All right. So Yahoo launched something called Yahoo Answers in response. This now has a usage of close to 100 million users worldwide. Okay. And as in the case of Naver, you can go, you can ask a question, and you can ask questions that are very pragmatic, satisfying an intent, trying to get a task done, like where do you suggest going to file your taxes? Okay. And along come lots and lots of good citizens who want to answer your question. They come in, provide answers. Okay. Now, you can ask other questions like, I have 2 Ethernet adapters, what do I do, and so on. And what you get is fairly detailed, nuanced answers. Okay. So you get social content. Now, among all the people responding to a question, the questioner can pick a best answer, or the community could pick a best answer, so you could vote something as a best answer. Okay? Now, when you get voted as the person providing the best answer, you're gaining social capital. Okay? This is not monetary capital, you're gaining social capital. And this, in fact, is good to keep many people going. So it's a form of open source. Okay? And this incentive system starts to get accumulated as points, just like your frequent flyer points. Okay? Here's the category of food and drink, and somebody called Swirly has made it all the way up to level 7, because 1,071 times, which you can't quite read perhaps, they've been adjudged as providing the best answer. Okay? So the incentive structure here is, in a sense, communal adoration. Okay? All right. Now, around the same time Yahoo launched this, MSN launched something called Q&A, which was identical in principle, but didn't quite take off. Okay? And we started thinking about why. And it all comes down to the assignment of incentives. Okay? So what assignment of incentives leads to good user behavior? Well, that begs the question, what's good user behavior? Okay? Is it providing good answers? Is it providing good questions, new questions? Okay. It turned out, and I won't give Yahoo or MSN any particular credit or discredit for this, but the incentive structure, the points and so on that Yahoo had put in place was a system that maximized user participation and growth. The system that you really might have wanted instead was something that improved the quality of this knowledge base. Okay? And if you go troll through Yahoo Answers today, you find a lot of people participating, but the average quality of the knowledge in there is not very high. Okay? And the reason is simply because you ask the question, what are people incentivized to do? And here, the incentive system is to participate, to add a lot of stuff without particular regard to is it good stuff. Okay? Now, questions like this, which is what leads to better social value, whom do you trust, lead to questions at the interface of computer science and microeconomics. And that's a fairly recurring theme in what we're seeing here. In fact, I'll touch upon this again at the end. A lot of this has to do with bringing understandings from microeconomics and mechanism design, which is a subfield of game theory, into computer science. Okay. This started us thinking a little bit about online media experiences, which I think of as the science and art of participative audiences, engaging, building, and retaining these audiences. Okay? And the flashback that I want to take you to is roughly 30 years ago, there was a consortium of sociologists, cognitive psychologists, and computer scientists, mostly at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. They gave us a couple of huge revolutions that have changed our lives fundamentally. They gave us the workstation, the personal computer, in the form of the Xerox Alto, together with the design of the GUI, the graphical user interface. But they also gave birth to the academic study of human-computer interaction. You see, prior to the work at Xerox PARC, computers were primarily the privy of physicists devising bombs and setting glass houses, and not a whole lot more. That was the primary use of computing. It wasn't something that a billion people in society could use. Okay. What I'm looking for here is a sequel to this revolution, which goes beyond people interacting with computers and software artifacts. It's about people interacting with other people, with the computer and the web, merely as an appliance that fades into the background. For the generation to come, this is not technology. These are appliances. Okay, they are to be taken for granted. Okay. And so this requires the coming together of cognitive psychologists, ethnographers, and computer scientists, again, to answer the kinds of questions that I'll point out in a moment. Now, the one thing that I'll argue is different this time is that the sciences we'll define now, are intrinsically data-driven. Okay. No longer is it the case that a social scientist must interview 30 people in a karate club and then spend 3 years writing a thesis. What you're going to have, certainly for people who work at the large web companies, you can turn 30 million people on tap and observe their behavior. Okay. Run very precise data-driven experiments. Okay. So I think this will represent a revolutionization of the social sciences becoming fundamentally more data-driven. Okay. What are the kinds of insights we look for? Okay. Why do people choose to lurk or participate in an online experience? What makes them create new online personas? From a business standpoint, why are some experiences like YouTube and Facebook and Flickr immensely successful, while others, like, say, Google Video and Yahoo Photos, fall by the wayside to these? Okay. For every one of these success stories, there's 100 failures. And the question is, what did those 100 do wrong? Okay. And we can always do ex post facto analysis that says, well, they didn't put the button in blue in the right place and so on. But user interface design today is at a point where the best practices are pretty well understood, and people don't fumble around with these things. Now, we need to ask the same questions and get the same level of understanding with online experience design so that we can understand what makes them take off and what makes others die by the wayside. Okay. And that leads to the question, what new genres are emerging? What can we provoke for content creation, enrichment, and participation? Okay. Eventually, this takes us to the question of audience engagement. So what does it mean to have an engaged audience? In the broadcast world, we speak of hours people watch a show, the audience size. In print, it's circulation. Okay. Today on the internet, we use page views. We can talk about hours of experience and interaction with the portal. And then you start to ask, well, who cares? And maybe that takes us to what we should be measuring. Well, the monetization engine that drives these is the advertiser. So it's the advertiser who cares. So if it's the advertiser who cares, what are they after? Well, my thesis at the beginning was eventually they're after intent. Okay? So what we need to be able to measure is participation by way of intent and fulfillment by way of intent. Okay? Now today, here are some proxies we have for engagement. Right? We can look at clicks and click-throughs. We can look at page views. We can look at how much time is spent. Do people create user IDs and so on, and all the way down to subscriptions. And these represent increasing levels of audience engagement online. Okay? This is still an extremely primitive, sort of, broad brush view of how we should be thinking of online audiences. We need to get much further than this. Okay? All right, for the last few minutes here, I'm going to talk about some extremely basic notions of monetization, which is sort of the other side. Remember, in my first picture, I had on the left side, you had the audience coming in, trying to get things done. We talked a little bit about how to try and fulfill their intent. Now I'm going to try to bring the advertiser in the picture. What is it they pay for and why? Okay. And what I'll show you here is actually material that's fairly primitive in our understanding of how monetization needs to work online. Okay. Perhaps we're a little further than what I'm about to show you already, but this is a good basic. So to explain this to you, I'm going to go back to the world of search. Okay. So first, some terminology. So here's a search, this one on Yahoo. Somebody comes and types Canon camera. I've deliberately misspelled the query with two N's in the middle of Canon. Okay. Nevertheless, we do return results about the correctly spelled Canon camera. Okay. What's interesting is off to the right, and that's because we, like all search engines, have fairly good spell correction technology and so on. Now, off to the right, you have a bunch of these advertisements. Okay. So each of those things, like the one I've circled, is an advertisement. Okay. A user can click through on one of these advertisements. When the user clicks through on that, two things happen. The user goes to something called a landing page that I'll show you in a moment. In addition, when that click-through happens, that advertiser pays Yahoo a sum of money. Okay, so let's examine how this works, because this is sort of the most basic form of monetization today. Okay, so here's the landing page. If you clicked on that ad, you would go to this page, which is a vendor of camera equipment. All right, so let's look one level deeper at what's actually going on here. Okay. So you have the advertiser. They have a landing page to which they want to bring traffic. They want to bring people interested in Canon cameras to their landing page and hopefully transact on that landing page. Okay. You have a sponsored search engine over there. That could be Amazon, Google, Yahoo, whoever. Okay. So the advertiser goes to the sponsored search engine and places a bid. Okay. The bid is something like the following. It says, I want to bid the sum of $5 on Canon camera. And the semantics of this is the following. It says, if you, the sponsored search engine, sends me somebody interested in Canon camera, then I'll pay you a maximum of $5. Okay? The advertiser can place multiple bids. So for instance, the advertiser can say, I want to bid $2 on misspelled Canon camera. Okay? So it's very similar to the above, but a different bid on a slightly different query. Okay? In general, an advertiser may bid on hundreds of thousands of these keyword phrases. Okay? Think for a moment about why I might bid less on the misspelled Canon camera. It's not because the advertiser thinks that people who cannot spell Canon are not intelligent. It's because there are many, many advertisers bidding on Canon camera. There are fewer advertisers bidding on the misspelling, and so the market is not as thick, so you don't have to compete quite as hard to bid high on the misspelling. Okay? All right. The engine decides when and where to show this ad. So the engine says, okay, I saw Canon camera. as a query, I'm going to place the ad. Where in the roster of ads I want to place it is up to the engine. Typically, you'll have hundreds or even thousands of advertisers bidding on a particular keyword. Only 4 or 5 will actually make it there. So there's some fairly sophisticated work that goes into figuring that out. I'll give you a glimpse of that. Okay? And then the engine decides how much to charge the advertiser when they do send a click over. Okay? That turns out to be the result of some fairly sophisticated game theory and pricing that I won't have time to discuss today. Okay? So that, at a high level, is how this works today. Okay? Now, the point I want to make here over the next few minutes is putting all this together requires the bringing together of fairly advanced computer science and fairly advanced microeconomics. To give you some sense, the number of advertisers at Yahoo or Google is in the hundreds of millions today. Okay, so this is not just a few big companies. And so the engine is retrieving from hundreds of millions of advertisements to put up on these searches. On the one hand, that seems big. On the other hand, it's not so big because we are already coping with tens of billions of web pages for the left-hand side of your search results. Okay? What makes this side challenging is actually the microeconomics, and I'll point that out now. Okay? Now, this engine solves 3 sub-problems. Okay? The first sub-problem is, of all the ads that are in the database, how do I figure out which ones match the query at hand? Meaning, a user just came in and typed a query. How do I figure out which of all these advertisements I should place up there? The second sub-problem is, how do I order these advertisements? What do I put in the first slot, the second slot, the third slot, and so on? Okay. And the third problem that, as I said, I won't have time to get into is, how do you price these clicks? If somebody says, I'm willing to bid up to $5, how do you price it? Because there's somebody else who's willing to bid up to 6, somebody else is willing to bid up to 4, and so on. Okay. And by the way, these numbers, if they seem outrageous to you, they're not. So $5 bids are not outrageous. There are keywords that have $100 bids. They tend to be associated with rare forms of cancer. So trial lawyers bid on them, so that if you have some sort of workplace injury that led to cancer, you click on an ad, the lawyer tends to make tens of thousands of dollars. So they're willing to pay $100 to acquire a customer. Okay. All right. Now, if you think about this, the first 2 functions you think of as information retrieval, because you're retrieving documents and ordering them. Now, the second 2 pieces, it turns out, are steeped in economics. Okay? And so what I'm going to finish with today is by saying a little bit about the ordering of the ads, because that really comes at the confluence of microeconomics, which is, a discipline of economics, and information retrieval, which comes from informational and computer sciences. Okay, so remember, we said that when you have a query like Canon camera, you have lots of people coming and bidding. I bid 5, you bid 4, somebody else bid 6, and so on. Okay. So the question we're going to look at is, of all the people who've bid on Canon camera, who gets top spot, who gets second spot, who gets third spot, and so on. Advertisers covet the top spot because studies show that's where the user's eyes drift naturally to the north and east of the page. And so that's where they want to click. Okay? So advertisers are willing to bid more in the hope of getting higher up. Okay? Now, the idea underlying this click-through model of advertising came from a man named Bill Gross from Idea Labs, who founded a company called Overture that was the pioneer in this field. And Overture was acquired in 2004 by Yahoo. Okay? And Overture used a particular scheme, which is what you'd think of as the obvious scheme. Okay? So here was Bill Gross's idea. The Overture scheme was to say, let's take the top bid and put it in the first place, the second highest bid and put it in the second place, the third highest bid in the third place, and so on. Seems very obvious, right? So let's look at all the bids on Canon camera. And when some user comes and says Canon camera, the first advertisement belongs to the guy who bid the highest, and then the second highest, and so on. Now, as a technological artifact, this is already non-trivial because bids change in real time, several hundred times an hour. Most bidding is done by robots. So it's not as if, I submit a bid once and for all for a year, and then I sit back. Bids are changing very fast in real time. So there is a non-trivial retrieval function here. But what I want to focus on is actually an interesting aspect that comes from economics. Okay? So this is a scheme that was pioneered by Overture and was used by Yahoo until about a year ago. Okay? So you could go and type a query like 747, and the top ad was 747 on eBay. In fact, for almost any query, the top ad was eBay. Okay? You could type a person's name, and you would get an ad from eBay. Okay? So what's going on here? What's going on is that eBay bids high on just about every keyword in an effort to guarantee themselves the top spot. Okay? It's not like they're going to sell you 747s on eBay. Okay? It's just that they want the top spot, and so they're capitalizing on the design of this mechanism that says put the highest bidder on top. Okay? What it's really giving them is brand advertising, because it's reminding users of the existence of eBay. Okay? So they can bid $50. They may not even incur the charge because nobody clicks here, but it's reminding people of the existence of eBay. Okay? All right. Here's a scheme that the media widely attributes to Google, but actually I'm pretty sure what Google uses is far more sophisticated than this, because the state of the industry is far beyond this. Okay? But here's a very simple idea that tells you how a little bit of microeconomic thinking can take you far beyond the revenue ordering I just showed you. Okay? And this is the kind of thing you go to a microeconomics professor, they say, well, this is so obvious, you should not only do this, you should do better. Let me explain what this is to you. Okay? If you take any advertisement, and here's the one slide with a little bit of algebra in it, okay, it has what I'll call a click-through rate. Okay? So what do I mean by a click-through rate? What I mean by a click-through rate is what fraction of the time I show this advertisement do people actually click through on it. Okay? So for instance, for a given advertisement, I might have a number like 3%, meaning for this advertisement, if I were to show it 100 times, then on average 3 times people actually click through on it. Okay? So I tabulate all these numbers for all the advertisements. Okay? Let's say I can do that. Okay? I also have the bid for the advertisement. Okay? Now, instead of ordering the advertisements by bid, as I did before, what I do now is the product of bid and click-through rate. Okay? Why is this good? Well, that eBay ad that nobody clicks on quickly attains a click-through rate of 0 and starts to drop. Okay? On the other hand, somebody who's bidding lower but is getting clicked on a lot is starting to rise to the top. Okay? One way to think about this is the product of bid and click-through rate is a proxy for revenue to us. Okay? So in a sense, I'm ordering in a way that puts revenue first rather than bid first. Okay? So order ads by expected revenue. Okay. Now you'd think this is the end of the story, but as I said, I suspect, I'm not privy to what Google does, but I'm sure it's a lot more sophisticated than this. Certainly what Yahoo does is more sophisticated than this. So one way to think about it is the following. I've shown you 2 forms of ordering advertisements, by bid and by revenue. Okay? These are 2 forms of ordering by economic score. Okay? So you ask the question, does revenue ordering maximize revenue? Okay? So if I were Yahoo or Google, am I assured that doing this revenue ordering I just showed you will actually maximize revenue? The answer, it turns out, is no. And this, again, is something a professor of economics will look at and say, well, that's obvious. It doesn't, right? And the reason is you should look at this in the setting of multiplayer strategic games, where an advertiser is part of a system of people playing a game with the engine. Okay? And so when the advertisers believe that a certain system is in use, they change their behavior. They change the bidding behavior. Okay? And in fact, Lahey and Pemek, 2 of my colleagues, showed that there's a family of schemes that bridge these 2 forms of ordering, bid and revenue. And in fact, picking some point in the middle really does maximize your revenue. Okay? It's not these extrema that lead to more revenue. Okay? So you can actually make more money by being game theoretic and strategic in your thinking around this. Okay, now this is a very simple example. It's by no means the state of the art in monetization, but I wanted to present this to you as an example of how this is not solely a technological artifact, but at the same time, a lot of the classical thinking on advertising also changes. Okay? And the monetization side, which I think of as content supply with money, is changing in the process. Right. Now, there's a sea of challenges this brings us at Yahoo and likewise at Google, and I'm sure at Microsoft as well. There's now teams of people designing these so-called marketplaces for advertising. Okay? There are marketplace design committees. Okay? And I could go on for pages and pages about the kinds of questions that they're faced with daily. But there are very simple questions like, what tools do you give advertisers? Should you expose to an advertiser the competitive bids? Should you tell them, here are some other keywords you could be buying? We do all of these to some modicum today. But what's the right balance between giving too much information and too little, right? That maximizes system value. Now, system value, advertiser value, user value, or our value. Okay? What do they get to bid on? When somebody bids on laptop, do we somewhere in the background divine that bidding on a laptop is a form of bidding on an ultralight laptop and give them that option as well? How do you price clicks? I didn't talk about this at all, but there's fairly sophisticated auction theory that goes into that. In fact, without getting into the details, what I'll tell you, this is actually quite public. I'm not trying to make any secrets here. But there's a web page on Google that brags about using Nobel Prize-winning auction theory. In fact, what Yahoo and Google both use, and I believe Microsoft as well, is a misdirected application of the Nobel Prize-winning theory. We're doing the wrong thing. But there are good reasons why we need to do the wrong thing. And that's a whole story in itself. But it's a fascinating story on pricing. Okay, so I want to conclude by saying that in this new media, monetization and system design, the social system design especially, are an intrinsic part of the whole. It's not an afterthought. It's not something where you can say, let's put it out and see what happens, because, as I mentioned, for every YouTube and Flickr, there's 100 that died by the wayside. Likewise, on the advertising side, it's fairly well documented that Yahoo continuing to use the Overture system until about a year ago cost the company billions of dollars. Okay? That should have been on its balance sheets. Okay? And to me, what gets me excited about this area, as we move from what I think of as glasshouse computing to social computing involving 1 billion people, is we genuinely have an opportunity for computing to meet the humanities like never before, disciplines like sociology, ethnography, and microeconomics. And that leads to a whole spectrum of intellectual challenges that I think are going to make the next 10 years very exciting for our field. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I now request